Each year, athletes from across the globe converge on Haines City, Florida, test the limits of their bodies and the resilience of their spirits at Ironman Florida 70.3. This documentary invites you behind the scenes of an athlete's return to triathlon after a forced 4-year hiatus, a story of grit, ambition, and unwavering dedication. From early morning swims to relentless training rides beneath the hot and humid summer sun and pounding footfalls on winding roads, we will witness the evolution of a competitor with a humble and grateful heart striving for redemption. But this is more than a race. It is a voyage through adversity and triumph. Through moments of doubt and bursts of inspiration, there will be setbacks and surprises, victories large and small, and the discovery of the true meaning of perseverance. Join us as we chronicle the milestones and missteps, the sweat and celebration culminating in one unforgettable day. This will not only be a tale of athletic determination, but a portrait of the human spirit, undaunted, unbreakable, and ever reaching for the extraordinary. Welcome to Ironman Florida 70.3, an endurance athlete's journey. Welcome, everyone, to Ironman Florida 70.3, an endurance athlete's journey. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I am head coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, and I have just completed week 8 of a 16-week plan as prep for Ironman Florida 70.3 in Haines City, Florida, this December. And so these are my weekly videos where I talk about how my training has gone, things that I've learned, some insights from the week. So like I said, this is the end of week 8. So let's jump in and just do a basic summary of the week. I think this was a pretty solid week. My training plan was 19 hours and 20 minutes. So that's how much I had planned to do. I got in 19 hours and 28 minutes. So it was 8 minutes long, but it was a solid week. I felt a lot better this week than I did last week. Last week, I came off of a rollback week and went full blown right back into training and actually had bumped up the training volume. And so I think last week was a little bit too ambitious coming off of a rollback week. I kept my volume the same this week in terms of total duration, and I felt a lot better. My body kind of like woke up and knew that it was still doing some work. So on aggregate, I think that I'm pretty comfortable with the assumption that my feelings last week was the result of just coming off of a rollback week with too much volume. And now my body is adapted and it's ready to get back to work. I got in all of my sessions, no skip sessions. I even got in all my core work. And the holiday that was this past Monday kind of helped take a little bit of stress off. Mondays are usually a big volume day where there's a strength session, there's a run session, and a bike session. So it's 3 workouts that I do during the day. And usually I have to spread them out morning, afternoon, and evening. But because of the holiday, I was able to enjoy my morning session and be able to do my strength and my run all in the same visit to the gym. So that was a big bonus. Excuse me. This week, I'm just looking at my notes, was the 4th highest training volume in terms of duration ever. And I have data going back to December of 2014. So that's when I started to collect data on my training. And so it's the highest volume for this year. And this is 2025. But, the weather's cooling off. And I'm able to now observe the fitness that I gained throughout the summer. As you're training in hot and humid conditions, it's hard to observe gains in fitness. And so as the weather starts to cool is when you really start to kind of see the fruits of all the work that you put in over the summertime. And so that's a big boost of confidence that I did the right things over the summertime and I'm feeling good. It still takes a lot of planning and logistics to execute this plan. I will tell you, this is a hard plan. I developed it as a high volume plan because I wanted to see if it was something that I could pull off. And, there are days where I actually have 3 sessions to do. Like I said, that's Monday, and Wednesday is another day. Wednesday looks a lot like Monday, where there's a strength session, there's a run session and a bike session. And so normally I would try and like group some of those together and get them done in one. But the job that I have now requires me to kind of log in. I'm working from home now. And so, there was a time where I was 60% in the office for like a month and a half. Pretty frustrating, especially since the job was sold as a remote job, and things have changed. And so now my stress levels are down again. I'm able to work from home, so I have a lot more freedom and flexibility, a lot less pressure in terms of like trying to get to the office, because I don't live close to where the office is. And so it took a lot of effort, and it was a lot of stress that was put on me to try and make that happen. So it does take a lot of discipline to try and get these sessions in and still execute everything else that, is on your plate, whether that be, a full-time job, if you're married and, you still have spousal duties that you need to manage, home duties, parents, if you're a parent, it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. And this is, a 19-hour plus plan per week. So it's equivalent to a part-time job. And not only am I fully employed hour a week position, but I'm also running my own business. I'm running Tabula Rasa Racing. And so we have a podcast that we're producing. There's other content that I'm producing for this series and other things that I'm trying to bring to market. It's easy to spend another 15 to 20 hours of doing my business stuff. And so it's effectively like an 80-hour a week demand right now. And so it does put a lot of stress on the body. Stress is stress. It doesn't differentiate between physical stress and mental stress and emotional. It's all the same. The body only knows that it's under stress, and so it reacts accordingly. So, it's easy to see if you have periods of high stress in your job, it's easy to see that flow into the quality of your workouts. And you can see that in order to produce the same pace or power or whatever it is that you're trying to measure takes more and more effort. That's one of the reasons that you start to see that, is because of stress from other areas of the job or of your life are feeding into that. And so now with the less stress that I have, I'm able to kind of like free that out and shed some of that. And I've seen an increase in the quality of my workouts and the performance that I'm able to execute. So like I said, this was a pretty solid week. I was just happy to see all green in Training Peaks. There were no missed sessions. Last week, I missed a leg session because of a tweak in a hamstring, and my legs just felt heavy and cooked. And, I've missed a couple core sessions here and there, but this week it was all green. I executed every single session, and I'm happy. I'm happy with that. That makes me feel good. So let's jump into the primary areas of the training plan. So let's start with the run. This week, I tested a new run-walk methodology, a new run-walk combination. I've been doing a 6-2, and so this week I tested a 7-2. And because I increased the run segment, I removed the intensity. And so I executed all zone 2 runs this week, just to give me some clear insight as to how my body is responding to the extra minute of those intervals. So it's not like, I only just ran 1 extra minute for the entire workout. There's, can be anywhere between 4 to 6 rounds of intervals. And so those additional minutes, they add up, how the body responds to it, and whether you can stay under control and maintain good form for the run segment is key, especially for me as I'm dealing with foot and Achilles issues and my ankles. So there are some issues that I'm dealing with, which is why I developed a plan that I did, and why I'm coming up with this execution strategy for Florida is not the execution strategy that I would really like for my ego. I really don't want to do a run walk protocol for the race, nor do I want to train that way. But these are the cards that I'm dealt, and so I'm trying to make the best of it and train in a responsible way that sets me up for success on race day, however that looks. I'm not sure. But so the 7-minute was a success. I felt good. I felt in control. My body was ready to go from the 6 to 7. So it was ready for the progression by holding that intensity down back into zone 2 rather than trying to push intensity and increase the duration. To me, that was a bad idea. So that's why I laid the intensity down and just maintained zone 2. I am finding that I really don't enjoy running in the shoes that have the bigger heel toe drop. So if you go onto the website, you go to tabularasaracing.com, there's a page on there that says Ironman Florida 70.3. That's where all of this content is stored. You'll see all of these videos. You'll also see picture galleries of each week's training plan. And at the bottom of the page, you'll also see a PDF for that week that you can download. And the page is dedicated to my run workouts. You'll see at the bottom, there's a note where it says, do my moderate runs or my quote unquote longer runs with these shoes that have a larger heel toe drop. The reason that I did it this way is to take stress off of the calves with that larger heel toe drop. In my normal race shoes, I'm running in a 4mm drop. I think these other shoes are an 8mm drop, somewhere between, I think it's like 8 to 10. But I really don't enjoy running in them. They feel heavy. They make my legs feel heavy. And so what I'm going to think about going into next week is maybe do my longer runs in my race shoes and then use these other shoes with the larger heel toe drop in some of my shorter ones, in 2 of the 3 shorter runs. There is like I don't want to call it like a recovery run that I have in the plan, but it's an easy zone 2 run. I'll use those shoes in that run as well as one of the others. The other shorter run that I do is on Saturday, which is part of the long bike. So typically up until now, I've been running first, then biking. And so I wear my race shoes for that effort. But I'm going to play around with this a little bit and see if, it kind of helps. Because right now I'm not enjoying these shoes at all. But I feel like it's a responsible approach to use to kind of mix things up to manage the stress on the lower legs. And we'll just see how it goes. One interesting note is that last week I had the 6 to 2 run walk interval and I had intensity. So, there were a lot of progressive runs that were in there. Intensity that was taking me into kind of like the mid to upper zone 3 range. And so we would normally call those just tempo efforts. I was able to get in for that week. I think it was like 20.5 miles for the week. This week with no intensity, all zone 2 efforts, just going to the 7 to 2, I was able to get in like 20.4 miles. So effectively no real significant difference in total weekly volume, but less intensity, more relaxed running. And, that was it was an interesting observation, I think, to where you can still maintain weekly volume in terms of miles without having to just stack on more and more intensity. There are ways to manipulate your runs to where you can still come up with the same kind of mileage without increasing duration at all. I didn't run more minutes than last week. I just ran differently than last week, and I came up with almost the same total weekly volume. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting observation on my part. There were no lingering issues with my hamstring last week. If you watched last week's video, I talked about a low hamstring tweak that I had in one of my runs. It affected my ability to do the leg strength session or the lower body strength session. And I was forced to kind of back off on the intensity for just one run. But I think that next run was supposed to be kind of like an easy zone 2 run anyway. So, but I was a little cautious. I just kind of kept it in tune and really kind of was paying attention to how that hamstring was feeling in some of the other runs. And I could still feel it a little bit, but it wasn't enough to make me change the plan or make me change the execution strategy. This week, there's been no issues, no lingering feelings in that hamstring, so it's good to go, and I'm happy with that. On Saturdays, like I was saying, it's not what I would call like a typical brick session because it's been too early in the plan to have that kind of approach, but there's a purpose to using brick workouts in triathlon training plans. If you go onto the Tabula Rasa Racing website. There's a blog that's hosted there. There is a blog that I wrote on the purpose of a brick session. There's also a podcast episode that I did for the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, where I talk about bricks. So if you would like to know any more kind of like insights into like how we use bricks, why we use them, what's the purpose, you can check those resources out. But now, starting next week, I do transition now to a normal like bike run brick. So I just changed that sequence to where now I'm going to ride first and then run. This is the time of the training plan where that is reasonable and I don't want to say required, but I would suggest it. Right now we're finishing week 8 of 16, so we're now at the 50% mark. I've completed 50% of the training plan. And so now I think it's a good time to kind of throw that in there, give my body a chance to adapt to it over the next 8 weeks. So that way, when I go into race day, I'll feel confident and I'll be ready to roll. So that's the big change that's going to be coming on Saturdays. And I'm kind of curious to see how I'm going to feel coming off of it. Looking back over the span of these past 8 weeks, I found that I've added about 5 miles of weekly volume from the start of the plan. So I think at the start of the plan, I had a weekly volume of like 15 or so miles. This week and last week, I got 20 miles. And so that's a 5-mile increase for the weekly volume. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you look at it in terms of percentages, it's a 33% increase in run miles over the last 8 weeks. And given the issues that I have to manage with my feet, I think that's a sign of progress, that I'm able to add that kind of volume on a weekly basis and not feel like it's stressed out. I'm able to run with good form. I'm able to push the intensity, and I'm progressing the run walk protocol. All of it in a responsible and effective way. And so I'm happy with the performance that I've been able to observe up until now and the progression that's been going on. We'll see how the second half of this training plan goes. What I would really love to do is just not have to walk at all. But I'm not quite sure if I'm going to get to that point, but I don't know where this run progression is going yet. Whether, it's going to get upwards of like 10-minute runs, segments with, a 2-minute walk. I'm not sure. I'm just playing this week by week to kind of see how my body adapts and responds to the volume, and I make the adjustments accordingly. I'm willing to gamble a little bit and take the risk, knowing full well that, I can always roll back, the following week if it was just too much. But it takes a lot of discipline to really, make those observations and stay in tune with how things are feeling, how your body is reacting and adapting to the training load and how we're managing that. Twice this week, I was able to get my feet into the cold plunge tub. That is something that I would like to do more often, but it is really hard to find that time and the proper sequence of being able to use the cold plunge therapy. What I typically will do is just kind of sit on the edge of the tub with my feet in the water, and the water kind of comes up to my knees. So the whole calf is submerged and the foot is submerged, and I've been keeping them in there anywhere between like 11 to 12 minutes. And so, it's a nice hefty time to keep your feet in there for the cold. You don't want to do this post strength sessions. So if you're looking at adding cold therapy to your training plan as a way to aid recovery, if you do have a strength component in there, you need to wait at least 4 hours post strength session before you use cold therapy. I'm willing to use it post run. I do know that the restriction of blood flow because of the cold therapy kind of robs the body's, natural inflammatory response. But I'm willing to absorb that and just say, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice that just to manage the difficulties that I've got with my Achilles and, in my feet. So that was a success. It felt good. It's hard to put your feet in there. You have to kind of like breathe through it and just kind of like almost put yourself in a meditative state, because there's a lot of nerve endings in the feet and the hands. So those are the two areas that kind of respond. It can almost be painful when they first go in there. But, after the first, couple minutes or so, things kind of levels out, and, your body kind of gets used to the cold at that point. And that's when the real work can kind of like set in, and the real benefits of that kind of therapy. I think that's the extent of the run training for the week. Next week, I'm sticking with the 7-2. I'm not adding intensity yet to those runs because my overall weekly volume increases. So what I want is, I want to rely on the assumption that I'm only going to raise one component of training volume at a time. Training volume is going to be composed of both intensity and duration, unless you do your training plan in miles, and you can talk about it in distance and intensity. But, I only want to increase one of those components at a time so I can manage the stress on the body and my body's reaction to it. So because duration is bumping up next week, I don't want to add more intensity, especially to a sport that is high impact that I don't have a very good history with. So I'm sticking with the zone 2 efforts, still sticking with the 7-2. The body's reacting and absorbing it well, so I'm fine with it. The following week after that, I think duration stays constant, so I may toy around with some progressions that's in there. I am still doing some progressive nature of the run, but it's progressive within the zone 2. So, I have a pace that I know is low in zone 2 that I should feel really comfortable at, almost where it actually feels a little bit harder to run at that very low end of zone 2 because the gait doesn't feel natural. It just feels off, like I'm holding back a lot. Then I know that I have a mid zone 2, which feels really comfortable, feels better than the low end of zone 2. And then I have an upper end of zone 2. And so what I've been doing is, I've been progressing within zone 2, but not going outside of it. And so, there's still a little bit of progressive nature because I like that. I think it's a great tool to use for practice for race day if you're able to execute progressive runs. It also teaches some discipline at the start of a run to allow the run to naturally build as it progresses, rather than just kind of like firing off and trying to get to some goal pace right off the start and then try and hold on. To me, I would much rather see a little bit of holding back at the start, especially in triathlon as you're trying to get your legs under you, and allow that run to build naturally and not force it. So that's what next week is going to look like, and that's how this week looked like. So let's roll on to the bike. I had a pretty good week on the bike. I've seen, just looking at my notes, I've seen an increase of 22% in the number of hours that I've spent on the bike since the start of the plan. Not all of my rides are outdoors. Actually, only 2 of my rides are typically outdoors. All the other ones are on the trainer. And then one of those 2 that's outdoors is really subject to weather conditions, as it's a gravel bike that's on Sundays. And so, like I said, there's a 22% increase in the number of hours since the start. My long ride has increased by 15% in hours. And now I'm hitting into the low to mid 70-mile range on my long rides on Saturday. I'm feeling strong coming off of the bike, which is a big boost of confidence that, I'm not kind of like overstretching it a little bit and I'm trying to go beyond my fitness. My body is responding well to it. My performance is right where I feel like it should be. And so, I'm not chasing stuff like I normally would. I'm just allowing it to come and develop naturally. I'm anxious to kind of see how the brick session is going to go because I have been feeling good coming off of the bike, but the runs have always come beforehand. And so now I'm kind of curious on how my feet are going to feel on the bike, because sometimes on my Saturday rides, my feet are a little stressed out and I can feel some of the heat and the tension in the heels because I ran first. And so I really kind of fired those things up a little bit and, they get really kind of tight. I'm kind of curious now on if, once I remove that, if I'm still going to have those same foot issues on the bike that I will have to manage. And so I'm curious on how that's going to be and how I'm going to feel coming off of the bike and then going into a run, how my calves are going to respond, how the heels are going to respond, how long is it going to take to kind of get my legs under me. Earlier in the year, it would take me on average about 7 minutes or so for my legs to kind of like find themselves and where I could start running with run legs rather than trying to run with biking legs. So I'm kind of curious on how long it's going to take, for my legs to kind of wake up a little bit coming off of the bike, especially since I'm going to be executing a run walk protocol, which is something that I did not do earlier in the year. So there's still a lot of like playing around and seeing how things are going to go with room to progress or room to kind of like back things off a little bit based on how it's feeling. So the long ride this week was the same as last week. It was 4 hours. I was actually a little long last week and I rode like 4 hours and 10 minutes because when I got to the 4 hour mark, I couldn't really find a place where I was riding that I could turn around safely. And so I ended up riding an additional 5 minutes to where I found a place where I could turn around. So that made me 10 minutes long because it's an out and back route. This time, I found a place where I could effectively stop like right on time, right at the 2 hour mark. And, I kind of forced myself and I was like, you know what? I don't have to ride that much further just to get to where I got last week. And it would make me feel good, that I was able to match last week, but knowing full well that I was long last week. And so I just said, no, I'm going to be disciplined. I'm turning around right when I should. And it doesn't mean that I'm less fit this week because I didn't get the same number of miles. And so, that's a lot of, issue, things that we have to deal with in our head, in terms of trying to judge on whether we're gaining fitness or we're making improvements and things like that. And sometimes if you see a decrease in miles, whether it be run miles or biking miles or what have you, sometimes when you see that decrease, the first thing that you kind of think is like, why didn't it increase? It doesn't always have to increase, but I think a lot of it is an ego thing. I think a lot of it is like you're searching for validation. And so, that's part of the mental side of endurance sports. And so I feel like I was disciplined and responsible and turned around when I should this time, despite having the negative thoughts that, I didn't ride as well last week. Looking back and comparing the two rides and the metrics, I didn't have as good a performance. I didn't negative split the ride like I did last week, but I still think it was a pretty solid ride. I was only short about 4 miles, so I still got in 75 miles on the bike, and I did it comfortably. I did it within my fitness, and I felt strong. I was also testing out I wasn't necessarily testing it, but I wanted to do kind of like a race day nutrition strategy test. So if you go back and you listen to last week, I talk about my concern on getting through 2 nutrition bottles within the span of 3 hours because I've been getting through these 2 bottles in the span of like 3 to 4 hours, upwards of 4 hours. So my race day strategy is to get through these 2 bottles, but I only have 3 hours to get through them. And so I haven't really been pushing the nutrition side of it because my rides are longer than what I expect to do on race day. So I've been trying to kind of like make these nutrition bottles last throughout the ride. But it's also forced me to say, well, then is my stomach trained enough to absorb those calories and absorb those carbs in the time frame that I'm going to need it to do that? And so this week, I brought 3 bottles with me. 2 I put in my rear bottle cage, and the other one I stuffed in my jersey. And I said, my goal is to have 1 gel within the first 10 minutes of getting on the bike. So that's practicing, coming out of the water, coming out of transition, and then getting that gel in me within the first 10 minutes of the bike. Then I have to get down 2 full liquid nutrition bottles before the end of the ride. And my goal is to do the ride within 3 hours, maybe a little bit on the shorter end, but I'm just going with 3 hours at this point. And so this week I executed that well. I took the gel in within the first 10 minutes of getting on the bike. And I got down the first bottle at the hour and a half mark, like right on time. The second bottle I got down in the second 1.5. So they were both completed within the 3 hours. But it also meant that I had another bottle in my jersey, as well as another gel that I had in my box on the bike. And so my plan was to drink that next bottle and get in a gel so that I could get close to that 60 grams of carbs an hour. Maybe it was actually going to be a little bit higher, because I'm still trying to push the envelope a little bit there and train my gut. I only drank about 2/3 of the bottle, and I skipped the gel. My stomach just didn't feel like it needed it, nor did it want it. And so, to only have an hour to get down a bottle, which typically takes me an hour and a half to drink, plus a gel, I think that was going to set me up for some potential GI issues coming off of the bike, which is not what I want. And so, on race day, I'm still going to have time during the run to consume that bottle and gels or what have you. So, I do have that freedom. I just don't have that freedom in training, because, I'm not going out and running a half marathon after riding, 56 miles. That's unreasonable. So, but I felt comfortable at the 3-hour mark with the nutrition that I took in. So that was a big boost of confidence that, yes, I'm kind of like right on track with that. I feel like I can get it down, I can absorb it, and I can handle it, and we'll just see what happens. Anything can happen on race day. We all know that. So, but it doesn't mean that we don't practice throughout. And so that's what I've been doing. So next week, my long ride goes up to 4.5 hours. So right now at 4 hours, I'm able to get in anywhere between 75 to 79 miles over the past 2 weeks. Going up to 4.5, I should be anywhere, I think, to low to mid 80 miles is kind of like where I'm thinking. It is just going to depend on the day. It's going to depend on conditions. This week it was a little windy. It was windier than it was last week, so I think that kind of robbed me a little bit of some speed as I had to ride a little bit more cautious to manage the wind. But that's kind of where I'm seeing it going. So, I do form a little bit of expectations with, a range of miles where I expect to kind of hit. So what I'm curious about is riding about, 80 some miles, how the legs are going to feel, to go out and just do a run off the bike, knowing that, I'm over biking on purpose. And so, but my body still has to absorb that stress, regardless of, what it is that I'm going to be doing on race day. I have to get to race day. So, I have to see how it's going to respond riding those miles and then jumping off and just going for a short run. The way that my runs are kind of structured is like, I have 3 short runs and 2 what I call moderate runs. I don't have a long run in my plan. So effectively the moderate runs are my long runs. So there's 2 of those in there. The short runs are all the same duration. And so starting next week, I've changed that a little bit. And so, in next week's video, I'll talk about how I changed it, why I changed it, and what's the purpose behind it. And so tune in next week for that kind of discussion. The strength work that I had on the bike this week was pretty solid. Most of my trainer sessions do have a strength component to it. So I'm not just sitting there just spinning. There's one workout that I do in the week where it's just kind of like an easy zone 2 spin. It's on a high volume day where I also do leg day in the weight room. And so the purpose is to kind of get on the bike and kind of flush the legs from that strength session and, get them prepared and tuned up for the next day. Or, it's on those days where I have a massage. So next week, I've kind of structured it because I have a massage next week. I didn't have one this week. And so I moved around a couple bike workouts so that I've got that nice flush ride on the day that I have a massage. And as I've said before in some of the other episodes, when I do get a massage, she works pretty hard and I'm pretty sore afterwards. And so it's nice to kind of force myself to get on the bike in the evening and kind of flush the legs out and get them loosened back up again to minimize soreness the next day for training. So my Monday session was, I want to say it was like some zone 2 intervals with some hill repeats. So they were short hill repeats. I think they were like 2 minutes in length. Normally my big gear stuff is I have a target of a zone 4 in terms of power, and my cadence anywhere between 50 to 55 RPM. That's kind of the overall structure of a big gear session for me. This time, because they were short, I really kind of wanted to push it and see if I can get that power into zone 5, still hitting the same cadence, the 50 to 55, but just kind of like ride a little bit higher. Normally my cadence is the low end of that cadence range. It's usually like anywhere between like 51 to 52, but I really wanted to push it up until like the 53, 54, so that would put me into the zone 5 bracket of my power. And I figured, well, I can do that and it's sustainable because they're short bursts. They're only 2 minutes long, but these aren't hill sprints. These are just hill repeats. And so, in order to do the hill sprint, I would have to allow that cadence to climb up into the 60 RPM range and higher. But I'm still maintaining a solid cadence, a little bit on the higher end to push that power up. My body handled it really well. Actually, to be honest with you, I thought it was a mistake when I went back and looked at the plan. I was like, why does it say zone 5? And I didn't bother to go back into the previous workout and talk about and read my comments on why I had changed it from zone 4 to zone 5. Because I was like, well, this is a big gear interval. Why do I have zone 5? And I thought it was a mistake. So I changed it and put it back down. And then I realized, I was like, oh, well, that's why. And, my performance was still in zone 5, even though my bike computer was telling me that I was riding too hot and I was outside of the power target. I was still in zone 5. So I made sure to put a note in next week's plans, like, this is not a mistake. Keep this zone 5, because I like using the same workouts multiple times, because it allows fitness to be absorbed. It does take a while for the body to build adaptation. So if you want to constantly have new workouts all the time, you really are lacking the ability to form a benchmark on where your performance is and where it's going. And so you kind of have a hard time on looking back at previous workouts and say, okay, well, this was a zone 4 effort, but the structure was different than this zone 4 effort. And so they're really not comparable. Doing the same workouts on a regular basis, or at least, frequently, allows you to have the ability to compare and see either progression or regression, or whether you're just staying the same. And so I feel like it was a solid session. I handled it well. I felt great. My next big gear session, I think, was on like Wednesday or Thursday. It's the longer ride. So in this plan, I do have 5 rides. I have a long ride, 2 moderates, and a couple shorts. And so, that's how the plan is structured. But this moderate ride is a big gear effort. And normally these are long, big gears. So we're talking like 10, 11 minutes of in the saddle, just grinding it out at 50 to 55 RPM with a power of, zone 4. But you do have a recovery period to where, let's say that we did 11 minutes of big gear session or a big gear effort. And then, the off interval would be like 2 minutes of like zone 1, just easy spinning to deload the legs so that you can go right back again and do another round. This time, what I did is, rather than have that zone 1 recovery, I put it at zone 2 with a cadence target of 80 to 90 RPM. So effectively, the way that I would interpret this is that I'm trying to maintain momentum after cresting a hill. So it's teaching me to climb, and then really not take an easy recovery once I crest the hill, and I settle right back into a zone 2 effort with a higher cadence, and then just keep that momentum going forward. There's very little recovery in that kind of method. So I wanted to see how that was going to feel. And so I put it in this week's plan, and I'll admit to you, it was challenging, but it was easier than I thought it was going to be. So I like that structure. I like the work. I like what it brings. I like the practice that it allows me to have. And so I kept it in the plan this week again, and I'm going to do it again. So I think these were 10-minute intervals, a 10-minute big gear interval with a 3-minute zone 2 effort. So there was no like easy spin after the climb. So that's the structure of that workout. But you can go onto the website, like I said, and you can see every single workout that I've done for this plan. You'll see all the details, all the intervals, all the targets that I set for each of them. What power target you should be in zone 2, 3, 4, or whatever. If there's a cadence target, it'll have that listed as well. And so I think it felt good, and I really enjoyed it. So I might add that one to the library. Today is Sunday, so it's my long swim and a gravel ride. So I break out the gravel bike and I go out and just hit the trails a little bit. I like that ride because it's another strength ride. It improves my bike handling skills, and it's just nice to change it up. It's a different kind of position that I'm on the bike. My road bike versus my gravel bike is a different geometry. I sit differently on it. And so last week I couldn't get on the gravel bike because it was bad weather. It was kind of raining, and so I didn't want to run the risk of tearing up the trails and run the risk of falling because of the wet conditions. So last week was a trainer session. This week, we had beautiful weather. It was kind of like low 70s. And what I ended up doing is I ended up swimming in the morning before church. Then I went to church, and then I went straight from church to the park and then did my bike workout. So to put this gravel session in perspective, give it a little bit of context, the Florida course, so the Ironman Florida 70.3 course has 1,248 feet of elevation gain. That's what the map says. Sometimes those maps aren't accurate, but it's the only information that I've got. And I did not confirm. I didn't reach out to anybody to confirm if the maps are right, but I'm going to assume that they are. But that 1,248 feet is spread over 56 miles, right? So my Sunday ride today, the route that I do has 1,079 feet of elevation gain. So I'm just shy of what I would see in Florida, but it's spread only across 16 and a half miles. So it's a lot less miles to spread that elevation gain. So it is a challenging ride. It is a hard ride. And, my legs feel worked afterwards. But it's good conditioning, and I love it. I think that I reap some good benefits from it. So this week, when I take on aggregate yesterday's ride, which is Saturday, the long ride, and then today's ride, I put in almost 92 miles of riding in the span of 2 days. But I don't feel burnt. My legs feel good. Actually, they don't really feel tight or anything yet, but I'm feeling fit on the bike, and I like this feeling that I've got coming off, knowing that I've just had like 92 miles in the span of like 2 days, but I feel great. So it's a big confidence boost. The last one, next to last, we have the swim. There are 3 swims that are in the plan. I have just like normal, I think there's 250s for some intervals on one day, and then I bump it to 300 intervals on another day. And then my swims on Sunday are my endurance swims. These are the longer intervals. So I had a decent week in the pool. I'm enjoying the morning swims because some of my swims were done in the evenings, and they were massive struggle bus kind of efforts. And so I've shifted the sequencing of them and doing them in the morning when I feel fresher. I feel like I'm able to swim with better form rather than waiting until the end of the day when I'm tired, and then chances are I'm going to swim with bad form, which doesn't make me a better swimmer. It increases my risk profile of injury in the pool. So this was a good decision to make, was to move the sequencing around to swim when I'm feeling better. I'm building endurance. I don't find that I'm getting faster in the water, which is reasonable because I'm doing zero speed work in the water. I'm not trying to get faster. I'm just trying to build endurance at this point. There was a time not too long ago where I was doing speed work in the water. It's hard to absorb, and it's hard to recover from those efforts. And so when I found that I was starting to break down a little bit because of it, I said, well, it's not worth the effort to to try and get faster at this stage, because really I'm just trying to get stronger. Because if I can come out of the water feeling fresh, regardless of what my time is, I just want to feel good coming out of the water like I've barely done anything. That's my goal, to where I can get on the bike and feel like, wow, I've got 99% left in the tank for the day. That's what I want. And so this approach that I've got here, I think, sets me up for that kind of result. So like I said, I've got 250s, 300s, and this week the long intervals were 900s. So today I did a 3.5K swim, so that's 3,500 in the pool. So there were 3 by 900s and I think 1 by 2 in there. So I finished off the day. I finished off the swim feeling pretty good. My elbow got a little bit hot there towards the end of it in my right arm, but I've been wearing my elbow compression sleeves post swim to help with the recovery and to take the tension off. And that seems to be working well. This is that kind of swim. So, this week I had 2 by 3K swims and then 1 by 3.5K swim. This is the second time this year that I've done a 3,500 swim. First, I think the first time was like back in May, and it did not go well. My body was not ready for it. Granted, those intervals that I did in that swim were 1,200s, so I did 2 by 1,200 in those efforts, and I had to go back to the drawing board after that. I had a hard time kind of like lifting my arms. I was burnt after that swim. Today's swim was 900 intervals, same distance, but I felt fantastic. Wasn't tired. I actually could have kept swimming if I wanted to, or if I had the time to do that. So it feels good to come to the end of a swim and not feel like, oh my goodness, just get me out of this water. I'm done. My arms are cooked. So I think that this is a good sign. So next week it bumps up to 1K intervals for the long swim. I'm still going to be swimming only an extra 100 yards next week. So with only the addition of 100 yards, but all of my intervals will increase. The 250s go to 300s, the 300s go to 400s. And then my long swims have always been increasing, but they go from 900 to 1K, so 1,000. And so I'm kind of curious on how my body's going to react to the longer intervals. I'm not too worried about the 300s because I'm already swimming 300s. But it's the aggregation of them. It's the accumulation over the week. So how does my body respond to swimming after swimming 300? Just a couple of days ago, but all the other stuff that I've been doing as well with the upper body strength conditioning. I swim 3 days a week. I'm lifting upper body stuff 2 days a week. So that's 5 days a week. I'm stressing my upper body. And so I have to pay attention to how things are feeling and how I'm reacting, how I'm absorbing it. And so this is going to be a little bit of a test now on, how my body responds to the longer intervals. They may love it, but I don't know. I think that's the extent of the swim. Like I said, I'm only swimming 3 days a week, but that's enough for me to try and at least gain a little bit of fitness, or if not, just kind of like improve my endurance a little bit without needing to see faster pace times. So it is frustrating, because part of me really wants to see some better speed, some faster splits in the water, but I have to keep reminding myself that that's not my focus. Because I catch myself saying that. It's like, man, that's slow. That's slow. And I'm not getting any faster. And it's frustrating. I'm doing all this work. But then I have to remind myself, but the work that you're doing isn't designed to give you more speed. It's designed to give you endurance and strength. So I have to remind myself. But that's it for the swim. So let's talk about the strength. There was a change in the methodology for the strength work this week. Typically what I've been doing over the past 7 weeks is really pushing my efforts in the weight room, trying to, in that last set, in the fourth set, really kind of reach failure using a muscular endurance methodology. So, I'm lifting, either 15 to 20 reps for just like straight sets. But if I'm doing supersets, then it's like 8 to 10 reps per set. But I've been trying to really kind of max those out in that last set. What I found is that I think I was stressing my body too much given the other volume that I'm doing. So like I talked about last week, I had two ways to go about doing this. I could either reduce the weight and maintain the reps and just go a little bit lighter so that I'm finishing with reps in the tank, or just completely abandon strength in the second half of the training plan because my volume is high enough to where my body's trying to recover. I don't want to do that last option. I would like to see the strength stay in the plan. I want to try and hold on to some of the gains that I've made in the weight room, but I also see it as, it's injury prevention. It's making me stronger so that I can hold form for longer. And I think it's making me a better swimmer, it's making me a better cyclist, making me a better runner, even though it's not the primary focus. So I don't want to remove it, but I got to figure out how to work with it. And so when I went into this week, I said, well, let's just try it. I'm going to just reduce my weight, take a little bit of an ego hit, and just, not try and push as much as I can and see how the body responds. If I don't respond well to it again, then I know that I was just going to have to remove it and sacrifice it. But I finished every single session with reps in the tank. I felt invigorated. I felt good coming out of the weight room. So I would finish the workout feeling good. I would get to the point where I would feel a little bit of a burn, but I wouldn't be burnt. So, I think that was a good approach to use. On aggregate, I don't think that I really reduced weight that much. I think some of it is I went back to what I lifted during my rollback week, which was around 25% reduction in weight. But in that rollback week, I reduced weight, but I increased the reps up to the max reps. So if they were supersets, I increased it to 10. If they were straight sets, I just did them up to 20. This time, I still stayed around the 8 to 10 reps for supers, and I stuck with the 15 reps for just the straight sets and reduced the weight. I felt like I lifted with better form. I could feel the muscles burn in the fourth set, but I still had room to go. I could have either kept lifting or lifted more. And so I said, this is where I want to be, given what I'm trying to achieve right now. I can always, after this race is over, I can reevaluate the approach that I use, but this is what I need right now. So I think I found my method going forward. I'm just going to reduce the weight and keep going with the reps. This was the last week where the lower body is in the plan. Next week, I remove the lower body strength. So I go from 3 weight sessions a week down to 2. And now it's just all going to be upper body. The reason behind that and the methodology that I'm using is that my volume is high enough with the running and cycling to where I don't need to add more stress to the lower body. My body has enough to try and recover from and absorb from the running and cycling. And all the strength work that I actually do on the bike, is functional strength. I can always kind of add some functional strength for the runs and do hill repeats on the treadmill and things like that to try and change things up. But I'm fine with removing it. I do like leg day in the gym. I like training my lower body, but right now it's not worth the time and it's not worth the risk. So it gets removed starting next week. I think that covers the 4 primary components of the training plan. So we talked about the run, the bike, the swim, and the strength. Nutrition wise, I think it was a pretty decent week. Had some good food thanks to Coach Katie. Had some good recipes, had a good meal plan. I will say that my weight did increase a little bit this week, so it was super frustrating. I got on the scale on Saturday before I went out for my long ride, and it was up. But at this point in time, I'm just trying to minimize the damage to my ego from seeing that number go up rather than go down. It's hard to lose weight with when you're actively training for performance. And it's one of the things that Katie has taught me is that, we can either train for weight loss or we can train for performance. It's really, really hard to train for performance and weight loss at the same time. I do know that it's important for me to kind of shed some of this extra weight because that is ultimately my body has to absorb that impact. So when you're running, it's like 5 times your body weight is the force on your joints when it makes contact with the ground. And so the lower that number is, the less damage and the less that the body has to absorb. I thought I had a theory that if I could just get stronger, then my muscles and my tendons and my ligaments would be able to absorb it, the higher weight, because they're stronger. I really haven't seen that come to fruition yet. I still cycle off and on the anti-inflammatories to manage the heat, but I'm still kind of struggling. I have not been able to abandon the walk intervals for my run training, which is what I would really like to do. But after this race is over, there's going to be a reevaluation on kind of like how I want to train in preparation for 2026. I do have some goals that I would like to achieve next year, some races that I would like to do. And so, I want to try and be lighter. But I also want to gain strength too. So it could be that my body is just going through a recomposition. So, I've had multiple people tell me that I look leaner, that I look stronger, and that they can tell that my body composition has changed, but the number on the scale hasn't really changed, which is super frustrating. So maybe my body's just going through a recomposition. So it's just kind of either transitioning muscle into fat. So I'm just getting stronger, but the muscle that I'm gaining is offsetting the weight that I'm losing, like the fat that I'm losing. I'm not buying that yet. So we'll see. That's always a discussion for another day. So the insights for the week. This is the segment of the video where I talk about kind of like, one or a few things that I kind of learned throughout the week. I would say that this is not necessarily something that I learned for the week, or some kind of like insightful observation, something that just kind of clicked for me. But it is a recognition that this week I celebrated 3 years of marriage to my wife, Stephanie. And so this is our 3-year anniversary this week. And I just want to say that my insights for the week is the sacrifices that this woman has made to support me in this effort does not go unnoticed. There's a lot when it comes to the preparation for a race. And the athletes aren't the only ones that have to make sacrifices. Those around us, the people that we live with, the people that love us, they make sacrifices just as much as we do. Whether we're sacrificing sleep or comfort or whatever, we don't have the ability to, go out and maybe, have drinks with friends because, we have another training session in the morning, or we don't like the way the alcohol makes us feel and inhibits our recovery. So we sacrifice that, during the training period. You can always come back to it later when your race is done. But there are others that make sacrifices as well. They have less time to spend with you. Maybe there's other things that that they choose to do to kind of, I don't want to say like quote unquote, like pick up the slack, but there are things that, I'm not able to get to, even though I want to. And then Stephanie steps in. And one of the things that she's done is the meal prep. Before I started training this, we would kind of like share those duties because Coach Katie gives me a meal plan every week. And so on Sunday is the typical day that we would do our meal prep. We have a fairly small house, and so it's not a large kitchen. So getting 2 people in the kitchen at the same time, you start bumping into each other and it's just less efficient. So what we were doing is one person would be in the kitchen cooking one meal, and then they would leave, and then the other person would kind of walk in and do their meal. So that's kind of how we're trading off. But for this race, Stephanie has really stepped in and has done all of my meal prep. So she preps the breakfast, the lunch, and the dinner. She'll typically do like the breakfast and lunch on the Sunday and then come home on Monday evening and cook the dinner. She does not like cooking. I don't like cooking either, but it's a necessary evil. If you don't cook, you don't eat. But, Stephanie we got married later, in our lives. And so she was single for a long time and it was just her. And so she didn't really cook a whole lot, didn't really like it either. And so when we were dating, she would come to my house when we would hang out, when we would spend time together, And because she lived, like 20 to 30 minutes away. And so the deal is that when she would come over, I would cook, I would feed and she would drive. But she doesn't like cooking and she finds it incredibly stressful. I agree with her. It is stressful. I don't like it either. But there are times where, it's really hard on her. And, I'll get a text, hey, please pray for me because, I'm stressed out. This isn't going well. And so I just want to thank her, from the bottom of my heart that I see the sacrifice that you're making. I see the willingness that you're putting in to, be supportive of me and my effort. And it does not go unnoticed. It does not go unappreciated. I thank you so very much for the stuff that you do to help me achieve what I would like to achieve. It's something that we do for each other. So that's what a marriage is. It's you coming up with ways to help and bring along the other person. So there are sacrifices that you have to make on stuff that you want to achieve because you know that the other person that you're with wants to achieve something too. And so we're there to help each other. And the amount that she has helped me just over the past 8 weeks has been tremendous. And there's nobody that I would want to walk this journey of life with other than you. So thank you so much for your sacrifice and your willingness to support me and love me and be there for me. So I thank you, Stephanie, for that very much. And I love you. So that was my insight for week 8. We're rolling into week 9. So now we're on the back half of the plan. Excited to kind of see where things are going, see how the body responds to the increase in volume. The volume will pretty much stay the same for the balance of the plan until I reach a rollback week or until I reach taper. And so I designed this plan to really be kind of like a longer peak time to where I'm like holding on to that volume. It has worked with some of the races that I've done this year. I did a similar approach to some of those other races and liked it, but those races weren't the same kind of volume that I've got now. So I'm kind of curious on how things are going to work. I'm willing to be flexible. I'm willing to back off if needed, but I'm kind of curious to see how this is going to go. So we're rolling into week 9. Thank you so much for joining me at the end of week 8 of the Ironman Florida 70.3, an endurance athlete's journey. I'm your host, Coach Justin, and thank you so much for joining. This will also be released on the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast on Tuesday. So it is Sunday now, so I'll push out this video. So if you're following the Tabula Rasa Racing YouTube channel, you'll see this before you'll have it on the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, but it will be there. Again, visit tabularasaracing.com. You can see all of the training plan that's there, downloadable as well, along with all the videos. Also, if you're considering a coach for 2026, you have some things that you would like to achieve. I am actively taking on athletes on my roster for 2026. If you're just at the point where you want to try something new or you don't know how to go about setting up a plan to achieve what you want to achieve in 2026, feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can go to the website. You can send me a message. I'll be more than happy to talk to you on how I can help, but I am taking on athletes on my roster. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. There's a feature that's on the website to send a direct message. You can find me on all the socials as well. You can message me there. I'm trying to think on if there's anything else that I need to cover. I don't really think so. If there's anything in these videos that you would like for me to discuss, just feel free to leave a comment, whether it's on the YouTube feed or in the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Leave a comment wherever you're listening to your podcast content from. If there's something that you would like for me to talk about in more depth, or something that I'm not talking about that you would like for me to talk about, post a comment. I'm happy to look at those, and I'm happy to incorporate those into the future videos. So again, thank you very much for joining me. This is the end of week 8 of the Ironman Florida 70.3 prep. Like I said, I'm your host, Coach Justin, and I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Good night.